The next slide highlights the percentage of managers using EU AIFMs according to the survey results. The Alternative Investment Fund Managers Directive, or AIFMD, has been a catalyst for hedge fund firms to focus on distribution, many of them for the first time. This has created a big challenge for non-EU managers, particularly for those with no substance in Europe. To date, many non-EU managers have not proceeded under the AIFMD banner because if they do not already have a presence or substance in Europe, the cost of establishing the relevant infrastructure is high. Nevertheless, a good number of non-EU fund managers that are marketing in the EU have decided to create their own EU AIFMs or become sub-advisors for EU AIFMs instead of opting to use a non-EU AIFM. Some non-EU managers have decided not to wait for the outcome of the third country passporting debate and have gone down the EU AIFM route early. Fund managers in this category may have been persuaded by clients or consultants that they need to have a presence on the ground in Europe. European funds, on the other hand, have little choice but to comply and appoint an AIFM for non-UCITs products, unless they wish to relocate outside the EU and opt out of selling in the EU. Indeed, it's interesting to see that some EU managers surveyed have decided to create non-EU AIFMs. Among survey respondents, the most popular jurisdictions for EU AIFMs is the UK, followed by Ireland, France and Luxembourg. The UK is clearly attractive as an AIFM jurisdiction, but the survey results may be skewed by the dominance of UK-based funds in the survey universe. Suzanne, what are the options for non-EU managers when it comes to marketing their AIFs in Europe?
Well, if you're not going down the route of setting up your own EU AIFM or using a third-party AIFM, you're left with two options, either using the national private placement regimes or reverse solicitation. With the national private placement regimes, the MPPRs, there's no need for that EU presence, but there are different rules from country to countries. So some markets have clearly outlined what the requirements are, whereas others are quite closed or near, the requirements are so onerous that they're next to impossible to access. Like passporting would provide an easier and wider distribution opportunities. Although we see a good number of non-EU managers that use the MPPRs and plan to do so for as long as possible. MPPRs will continue until at least 2018, and they might be disbanded after that, but the jury's still out. The other option is through reverse solicitation, although this should probably be approached carefully, as there is a bit of risk involved. So you need to be very comfortable in what you're doing. Investors have to come to the fund themselves without any prior solicitation of the fund manager. So you need to be careful about this approach. Full registration is the safer route. But if you use reverse solicitation, it would be important to clearly document what you're doing.
Thanks, Suzanne. Sarah, ESMA is looking at extending the AIFMD passport to third countries. What countries are currently under review?
Well, Ken, there's a lot of to and fro on this. ESMA did come out recently and opened up the passport to Guernsey, Jersey and Switzerland, and I think that was probably on the basis that their local regimes are kind of comparable to the AIFMD regime, so it wasn't that hard of a decision. However, there are other regimes where they're not currently recommending access. Hong Kong, Singapore, the US, just to name a few. And I think there's a little bit of an issue in there in terms of the arrangements that those countries have in terms of access to EU AIFMs and AIFs into their home market is going to be a key factor because they don't have reciprocity. The latest we heard on this was in January of this year, and it was a response by ESMA to a letter that the European Commission sent them back in December, where they requested information from them about timeframes around completing their reviews of the regulatory regimes of other countries, and also how many countries they thought that it would warrant actually extending the passport. ESMA said that they are going to continue to look at the regulatory framework of certain countries and also the enforcement of that framework, and they're under pressure now to come back to the European Commission by the end of June in this year. To your question, the countries that they are going to look at are the US, Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, Canada, the Isle of Man, and a few of the notable outliers that haven't already made it on the list, which is the Cayman Islands and Bermuda.
Thanks, Sarah. Suzanne, what are the main hurdles managers are facing when it comes to marketing AIFs in Europe, and what are their opportunities?
Well, if we looked at a decade ago, hedge funds didn't have any of these headaches. They were able to target qualified and professional investors virtually anywhere in the world with relatively few constraints. So I guess the main challenges that managers are facing today is understanding the various options for accessing Europe. You know, should I passport? Can I use the MPPRs? Am I covered by reverse solicitation? Should I go the whole hog, set up an EU AIFM? And then once they do make this decision, a whole other set of questions arises in relation to understanding the regulatory requirements for their chosen path. And that's not always very clear, especially if we were using MPPRs. The next big challenge is cost, and this is a big one. Some of the markets are more expensive than others, especially in relation to regulatory fees. You know, scale it provides cost advantages, and this is where it deepens the divide between the larger and smaller managers. The larger managers can have more complex distribution strategies, whereas the smaller managers tend to stay more localised. But I guess the main opportunity is for managers is that AIFMD forces them to be a bit more focused about their approach to AIF distribution. You know, gone is that scattergun approach of, you know, entering all markets. Then managers need to give a lot of consideration before entering a particular market and taking into account the cost benefit. The costs of entering a particular market might outweigh the funds that actually can be raised. You know, AIFMD passporting offers, you know, distribution opportunities, particularly for firms with global opportunities who you know, who can utilise the passport and take on board these costs. There's opportunity for large distribution opportunities, particularly if you look at the success of the UCITS passport, and if AIFMD passporting, there's even a quarter of that success.
Thank you, Suzanne. What are the most popular markets for AIFs, and what are the deciding factors for choosing certain markets?
It depends on what way you're approaching Europe, whether it's through passporting or MPPRs. The deciding factors are similar though. It's the cost and the ease of access. They're the big deciding factors. For example, like the regulatory fees for different countries are vastly different. You know, whereas Ireland and the UK have no charges, where I think the UK charge for MPPRs, France, Spain, Luxembourg, and others charge up in the thousands for regulatory registrations. So, you know, and some countries are easier to access than others, and the requirements are more onerous in some countries than others. But the most popular markets for using passporting anyway, EU AIFs are most actively marketed in the UK, followed by Sweden, Ireland, Finland and Denmark. Germany is only ranked 6th, and that's mainly just due to the fact that there is additional requirements there that many firms find burdensome. So that's why it's ranked number 6. And then using MPPRs, we see clients mainly marketing in the UK, Ireland, Netherlands, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Luxembourg and Norway. All of these have clearly outlined what the requirements are in relation to registration. So that makes them easier to access. Some of the other bigger markets have missing from this list have actually nearly made it impossible to access under MPPRs.